All right. So this is our second week, I guess, in our yearning series. It was actually supposed to be last week. I'm sorry we had to cancel on you. But 2 weeks ago, we talked about we all have a yearning for a home. That every single one of us has that longing for a place where we are accepted, where we belong, a place where we might possibly find our true selves. And we talked about the reason why that is because we once had a home where we were who we were really meant to be. And ever since humanity's been separated from God, we've been exiles, like wandering in a foreign land, searching for our true home. And our families and our houses in this life are just like inns along the way to our true home back at God's side. And because of that, like our families now and our homes now and our friends now never truly fulfill like we want them to. Never truly fulfill like maybe we remember from a distant memory, because they can't do as created things what the Creator can only do. And so all of us are left yearning. And Jesus himself then says, hey, I've made a home for you by my Father's side, in my Father's house. And the end of this story is the fact that we're brought back home. In fact, God brings the house to us. He's like the cosmic RV, right? He parks it right on earth, and he says the dwelling place of God is with man. And so that's the end of the story. We were with God, we rebelled, thought we could make a better home for ourselves, and things have been jacked up ever since then. And we all wander. But one day, because of what Jesus did on the cross, he made a way back home. And home's going to come back to us on the last day when Jesus returns. Today, then, we're going to talk about our yearning for freedom or rescue. And I think this is, again, something that's part of every one of our hearts. Now this might be strange to you, right? Because, after all, who's been enslaved lately? No? Ever been in slavery? At work, yeah. Ever had a shackle chained around your leg, though? All right, probably not. But we all yearn for freedom anyways, even though, like, in America, unless you happen to be somehow sold into, like, sex slavery or something, or you're an immigrant that's forced into slave labor, you're probably not truly familiar with a life of slavery, though you can imagine it, right? But we all yearn for freedom and rescue, even though we never have been in that physical bondage before. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we all have that yearning in us? Maybe I haven't sold you on that yet. We have a memory we were in bondage at one time? Or slavery one time? That we were free at one time. Right? Yeah. Yeah, we deep down in our bones, we know that there's a truer freedom that we were always meant to live in. And even though we don't have walls that hold us in and chains that keep us bound to a wall or to a floor or bars that keep us from going where we want to go, we all sense that life could be freer somehow. Now, why? How does that express itself then in everyday life? That is what kind of things kind of hamper that freedom that we feel like we were meant to have? Another way of saying it, what kind of things are we in slavery to now? Money. Yeah, how are we in slavery to money? Yeah. Yeah, we need that money to live, right? The world spins on a dollar. you know, um, you need money to make things happen, to secure your life, your happiness, and you can be in bondage to chasing that dollar that, even though it's paper and it's kind of rough, seems to slip through your fingers, right? Yeah. How else are How else are we in bondage to money? Probably more of an American problem than anything else. There's never enough, right? Yeah, because there's always something more that we want or need, right? And then in America, especially around Christmas time, how does money enslave us? Just take out a credit card. It's 17% interest, right? And the majority of you, if you're like the statistics across the country, are in bondage to credit debt, right? You owe your life to somebody else. You're working off trying to pay your freedom. And if you went to college, you're definitely in that category too, probably. What other things are we in slavery to here in this life? Time. How so? Never enough time, right? Yeah, burning daylight. Yeah, I'm like that way too. My daughter, she'll like fight sleep. Both of them do. I got a 2.5-year-old, and she'll like, I know that she's fighting sleep when at 9 o'clock at night, a half an hour past her bedtime, she's running in circles. Why? Because she knows that's the only way she can stay awake, right? My 9-month-old will like reach over and grab something to start shaking it because she doesn't want to go to sleep either, right? But we're in bondage to time. In fact, I think the desire not to sleep is really the fear of death in all of us. We don't want to miss life. And what's death but missing life completely? And you miss like a third of your life sleeping. It wasn't meant to be that way. Right? I'm not saying sleep wasn't meant to be, but we were supposed to live forever, not miss a thing. Right. What else are we in bondage to? Entertainment. Yeah. Man, you just picked my idol right there. I like the Netflix, baby. I like seeing my next TV show, right? It's like I run through one show, like we just finished that show Nikita about assassins, and and it's like, man, I love that show, and then it's like, oh man, we got to wait like a year till the next one comes on Netflix, and I'm in anguish. I'm in anguish until I find another fix, another program that I can watch an episode a night and stay on with the story, right? And at times I didn't have TV, it was like the book. Right? I finished my favorite novel, and it's like, okay, I need another escape. Right? Why do we need escapes like that? Because we don't have the freedom to do the life-filled things that happen on those shows. Not that assassins are life-filled. but the adventure, right, and the energy and the excitement and the thrills. We're in slavery to monotony a lot of times. Right? What else are we in slavery to? Expectations of ourselves and other people. Right? How does that enslave us? Constantly, right? We expect ourselves and other people to be perfect, don't we? Does it ever work out that way? Not unless you're a pretty deluded individual, right? All right. Once you think you're perfect, that's the kind of person Jesus would yell at and say, hey, you don't know, you're a whitewashed tomb. You're dead on the inside, and you're fancying up the outside, right? And when we have that expectation of ourselves, we always let ourselves down. When we have that expectation of others, they're going to do nothing but disappoint, right? I mean, they might make you happy for a while, but eventually they're going to disappoint you. Everybody, My wife disappoints me. My kids disappoint me. My parents disappoint me. And I'm not saying I feel that way all the time, but it happens, right? My wife's not here. That's when it gets dangerous. Like, he's got a chance to vent, right? No, that's not the case. That's not the case. But everybody lets us down, right? And ultimately that happens because everybody dies, right? Everybody will leave you, either during this life or when their life ends or when your life ends. What else are we in slavery to? Judging people, all right? Why do we judge people? Makes your expectations about yourself seem truer, right? Because by comparison, I guess I'm not too bad. Even though I fell short of where I want to be, at least I'm not here. Right? That's the problem we all have, because the only one up here is Jesus, the righteous one, the one who always did what was good, right, and perfect. Every one of us falls short. But we don't like to admit it. We don't like to live up to it. And so we live a life of denial and self-righteousness. Right? We think that we are right in and of ourselves by how we live. We're good enough. Right? Or we live a life of despair, because we think that we have to climb that ladder to reach up to Jesus' level so we can be accepted into God's house. And we know we fall short. And so we just kick ourselves all our lives saying, why am I not good enough? Why am I not as good as so-and-so? Why do I keep messing up? Right? Despair. Anything else that we're in slavery to here? I think maybe the expectations, I thought the approval of others, right? We're in slavery to that, right? You want everybody else to think that there's no problems with you. The reason I know that is because I feel that same way, right? I don't want you to see the cracks, so I don't want you to get too close sometimes. And if you point out a crack, it's easy to say, that's not a crack, that's just a hair. It's not a real crack, it's just something in the way. Step back a little bit, and you can see it clearer from a distance that I'm smoothed out. There's nothing wrong in my life. Right? We also get in slavery to, drugs and alcohol. Right? God gave us drugs to be used as doctors use them. You wouldn't want surgery unless you had drugs. All right? You wouldn't want to live post-surgery unless you had drugs. All right? Some drugs are a good thing that God gave us. In fact, even the really bad ones were used at one time for good reasons. Well, not all of them. Some are just made up and crazy. They're going to cause a zombie apocalypse. All right? That crocodile stuff, don't do drugs. That's horrible. But we live for that next fix sometimes. That's easy to do, all right? It's easy to do something just because it's fun once in a while, and then it's easy to do it just because I need to take the edge off. And then taking the edge off means I really want to have freedom from my life completely, so I want to be living on a different level where life doesn't even touch me anymore, right? And then pretty soon that drug or alcohol becomes your life. It replaces the things of most value to you, and you end up being enslaved to it, right? Because it can never deliver what it promises. Right? And then a lot of us, we live in slavery to the past, right? Because of something that we did, right? Yeah, you think God could accept me, but if you knew what I did back in the day, what I did to so-and-so, how I lived, you'd kick me right out of this place. I can say that because I feel that. Because I got the same skeletons in my closet. But I live in slavery to that, and sometimes I think I'm not good enough to sit here and teach you all. I'm not good enough to even bear the name of Jesus as his follower. And the truth is none of us are. That's the beauty of what true Christianity is, what the true gospel is. The good news is you don't have to measure up because Jesus measured up for you, and so there's no need to pretend. There's no need to hide because Jesus hung there on the cross for us and all of our shame so that we don't have to be ashamed. All right. So you look then, the people of Israel, the people that this book, like the whole Old Testament is about, and much of the New Testament, Jewish people, the people of Israel, are key actors and players in it. You see that they are in like real slavery, that is physical slavery throughout much of the story. Right? The biggest time is when they're in Egypt. They're held in bondage for many years. We don't know how many. I don't think it says. We just know that they were in Egypt for 400 years, and then they were enslaved at some point because God blessed them so much that they grew into a mighty nation within a nation. And Pharaoh got scared and enslaved them. You see later on, like as they come into the land of promise, Philistines and Canaanites of various varieties, they end up conquering the Israelites at times, or portions of them at times. And they live for sometimes years under bondage of their enemies. You see other times, you see the people of Israel being brought into slavery in Assyria, which were nasty dudes. They'd make piles of human heads on the side of the road saying, don't mess with us. We're in control. And so they took like half of the country into slavery at one point. The people were brought into slavery in Babylon. A lot of Jewish musicians talk about Babylon. That's still a big theme in their history. Bondage there. And then even when God actually changed the minds of kings, and the kings of the mightiest empire, the Persian Empire, mightiest empire of the time, just let the people of Israel go back to their land, rebuild their walls, rebuild their temple, and they returned. Though a lot of them stayed where they were living out in exile. And they returned home, and they had their own king even, and they had their own land, but they were still then in bondage to the Persians. And then when the Greeks took over, when Alexander the Great took over, he had them in bondage, and then his successors did. And then finally when the Roman Empire grew and took over that whole region, and Israel was still under bondage to them. And so during Jesus' day, that's the case. They're in bondage to the Roman Empire. Oh, and one more thing. At times when they weren't under slavery to foreign kings, they were often in slavery to wicked kings of their own people who acted like foreign kings and who did detestable things like sacrifice children on altars and human sacrifice and all sorts of detestable practices. And so a lot of times they were in charge, and so they constantly felt like they were in bondage. And during Jesus' day, then it was just one of those situations. You had the Romans, foreign enemies, in charge, but then they also had their own king. It was the only exception in the whole Roman Empire that King Herod and then his children had that title king, and he was the only one allowed to have that title besides Caesar himself. And so they had a wicked king over them, and then a foreign king over them as well, and they felt completely in bondage. They yearned for freedom to live in peace and safety without soldiers in the street. They wanted freedom of religion, to worship as they were truly meant to worship. They wanted freedom to have their own culture, right? To live in a way where they would feel comfortable and safe and accepted, right? And we all feel this way. We all feel this way. And while they were yearning, they looked back to this prophecy from 400 some years beforehand, from the book of Micah. If you want to open to page 706 in your Story of God Bibles, right there. page 706, or at the top left hand of the page. It's Micah 5:2. Page 706, it says, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah," that's the name of a town, "are only a small village among the people of Judah. Yet a ruler of Israel will come from you, one whose origins are from the distant past. The people of Israel will be abandoned to their enemies until the woman in labor gives birth. Then at last his fellow countrymen will return from exile to their own land. And he will stand and lead his flock with the Lord's strength, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Then his people will live there undisturbed, for he will be highly honored around the world, and he will be the source of peace." So what kind of a person is God promising here? Sorry, Rhonda? Perfect? Okay, how do you see someone's perfect here? What was that? He's sending Jesus, so you know that he's going to be perfect from that. Yeah, what does the text say, though? He's sending someone to save Israel, right? Yeah. What kind of person is that? Does it say anything about what that person is like? Yeah, highly honored, right? Source of peace. Right, coming in the Lord's strength and in his name, right? So in the majesty of his name. No one else has talked about this in Scripture. People come in the name of the Lord, but in the majesty of his name, right? It says something's different about this guy. Now, what else does it say about him? Or about what he will do? He's a leader. All right, what kind of leader? He's strong, all right? He's a strong leader in the Lord's strength. You don't get any stronger than that, in God's strength, right? And you kind of have to infer it a little bit, but he's a shepherd, too, right? He's not a leader like those bad leaders that hold you in bondage, but he's like a shepherd who guides and takes care of the sheep and gives everything they need. Right, because he will stand to lead his flock. Right, and it brings up all those imageries from Scripture. Right, and Jesus himself says, "I am the good shepherd who lays down my life for the sheep." Right, it seems like a stupid shepherd to me. Right, I can replace the sheep, but I don't think I can be replaced in my family, and I don't really want to trade my life for a sheep. But Jesus says that he's the good shepherd, and he says we are his sheep. And he lays down his life for us so that the wolves can't get us, so that our enemy can't devour us and kill us. But rather, he does amazing things, right? Like leads us to green pastures, right? By quiet waters, right? All that stuff from the Psalms. Anything else you see here about what God will do? Yeah. Man, that's awesome. Is he just going to bring peace? He'll be the source of it. Right? Man, that's awesome. Man, tears are welling up right now because I yearn for that day. Right? He's not just a peace bringer, but he is peace. Right? I think other translations say he himself will be our peace. Right? Just kind of like God's love. Right? He's not just a lover of people, but He is love. Everything that we yearn for, everything that our hearts just reach out for, and the desire to be loved, that's who God is. In the same way, every rumble and earthquake in our hearts that just says, silence me, just still me, give me peace, God says, I can not only give you that, but I am peace. In fact, you can't find it apart from me because I am peace. Right? He's not just a giver of life, but He is life. You can't have life apart from the source of life. Right? It'd be kind of like that light trying to work without being connected to the power grid. Ain't going to happen. Right? You need to be connected to Him because He is our life. He is our love. He is our peace. And the other thing it says like he's going to be from the distant past, right? Let's see, what does it say here? Whose origins are from the distant past. There's a couple other things I'll unpack for you real quick. One, there's a real significance in the fact that this is happening in Bethlehem. A very important guy from this book came from Bethlehem. You know who he is? Jesus, right? There's someone before him too. It's in the Christmas story that you often hear read. Linus even read it. And Charlie Brown, right? Yep. This day in the city of David. Right? David was called out of Bethlehem as the king of God's people. And if you read like 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and any other reference of David like after that, like sometimes he's depicted with all of his flaws, and I think Chronicles actually like depicts him as being like perfect. Like they whitewash his history a little bit. Why? Because they yearn for a king like David was. Not the bad stuff that he got into occasionally, but they yearned for all the good stuff that he was in, that he led his people in peace. He led them in the truth of God. He was a worshiper. He was like a priest, even though he wasn't a priest. He led God's people in the ways of God. And everybody, that's like the golden age of Israel. And even like at the end of some of these, the Old Testament stuff, there's prophecies about David's line continuing. And there's things said like, even to this day, there has never been a king like David, even though we yearn for him. Even though God promised that there would be an heir to David's throne who would reign forever, it still hasn't happened, and we're waiting. Right? And so this promise is that there would be one from David's line who would come and would rule forever, which didn't really make sense in the prophecies. Like David's like, okay, is my kid going to live forever? That doesn't make sense. Well, it makes sense if your kid's also the Son of God. Right? And Jesus is called the Son of David many times in the Scriptures. He's the heir to the king. As we said a couple weeks ago, if you like the movie Lord of the Rings, right? Aragorn, Strider, the ranger, he's like living out in the woods, but he really is the one who's supposed to hold the sword and sit on the throne. And he's the one destined to lead, though he doesn't have it at that moment. And Jesus in his life wasn't sitting on the throne, but now he is. Now he's sitting on his Father's throne. And one day that throne's coming down to sit in Jerusalem, in David's throne, and he will reign forever. Right? And other translations of this say that he is from Ancient of Days, which really puts it in perspective. It's not just the distant past, but ancient. Right? And God is actually called the Ancient of Days in some scriptures. And so it makes all the connections right there. But Jesus Christ then, when he came and he preached his first sermon, when he grew up from that little babe in Bethlehem to a carpenter's son to, at 30 years old, just blowing the minds of the people in the way that he preached and taught and healed and did miracles. He did his first sermon. He said, I've come to set the captives free. Right, I've come to set the captives free. And he did that through healing people and delivering people from demons and other types of illnesses and ailments and even death as he raised some from the dead. But ultimately, he hung on the cross. And that's where our true freedom is. And that's why that's been the symbol of all who follow Jesus ever since the early days of the church, right? Because he set us free from our bondage to illness, to aging and decay as his body was torn apart, as his body was broken down. And as he hung there suffocating and bleeding out before the world, his body carried our afflictions and pain and sorrow so that we could one day be freed from that. So one day he'll come and he'll remake our bodies and they'll never have to experience that or even the common cold again. Because we'll be made right, perfect as we were meant to be. Right? He's come to set us free from our bondage to hatred. Right? That's one of the things we're in bondage to. Right? Because he hung there hated, mocked, and scorned. And he chose not to continue the vicious cycle of retaliation. And he said, you can just blame me. I know it's your fault. It's all of our faults. We are all rebels before God. And in our rebellion, we hurt one another. But he says, I'll let you hurt me so this can end. And I'll set you free by ending this war. He set us free from shame, right? He endured the cross and its shame, Scripture says. And he was shamed and spit on as he hung there naked, right? Our artwork puts a little loincloth around him. Wasn't the case, probably. Completely humiliated, naked, and dying in front of everyone. All right, he set us free from hopelessness. Right? Because there's nothing more hopeless than being crucified and nailed to a tree. There's nothing more hopeless than being put in the ground, dead. And one of the most vicious ways to execute a criminal. There's nothing more hopeless than no heartbeat and no blood in your veins to resuscitate you and a heart that's pierced. But he defeated death. God raised him on the third day, and because of that, man, we're free from hopelessness. We're free from the fear of the devil, our enemy, from the fear of guilt, from the fear of sin, our rebellion, from the fear of the grave itself. He set us free who were held in slavery all of our lives to the fear of death. And so if all of this is true that we shared today, how does that change our lives? What does that do for us? We're free. Yeah. We're free. Jesus says, if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. And when you believe what we're talking about today, you are truly set free. There might be times when those chains are rattling and you start fearing in your remembrance of the slavery you were once in. But then when you remember the cross of Jesus, you remember those chains aren't even there anymore. I am free. I have nothing to fear. I have nothing to prove. I have nothing to strive for and secure for my future because Jesus did it all. And I can rest. I can have peace. And he is our peace.